So I've been talking about the disinformation primer. It's a report created for internal use only by USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development. The document came to light through a FOIA request and a lawsuit by America First Legal. These guys are fantastic. Anyway, eventually, the primer admits that, quote, there is an inherent contradiction between the democratic ideal of free speech and the regulation of online content. You don't say. But just a few paragraphs later, the report says that since disinformation is such a wicked problem, I've never seen a government document use the word wicked. Such a wicked problem, government may need to come up with some new ways to regulate, meaning censor speech, like using co-regulatory models, or put another way, public-private partnerships. Then the primer quotes a policy paper from the Brookings Institution, which says, quote, to effectively manage disinformation and related online problems, governments and platforms will need to develop an architecture to promote collaboration and build trust among stakeholders. The Brookings paper touts something called the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, an NGO working to prevent terrorists and violent extremists from exploiting digital platforms. Remember, we have now been called terrorists. Moms and dads have been called extremists for standing up in their school board meeting. So we're not talking about traditional terrorists or extremists. This NGO was founded by Facebook, Microsoft, YouTube, and X, the former Twitter. Well, Microsoft, Facebook's parent company, Meta, and Google are all major donors to the Brookings Institution. So maybe it's not a shock that Brookings would recommend government teaming up with companies to regulate free speech. And as we've seen from Murphy versus Missouri Supreme Court case, this is exactly the type of collaboration the Biden administration has been engaged in. Every week, it seems like we learn more details about the scope of Team Biden's censorship efforts. Earlier this year, you may recall a shadowy nonprofit I told you about called the Center for Countering Digital Hate. It was founded in 2017 by a British guy named Imran Ahmed. He was a former advisor to Labour Party members of the British Parliament. Ahmed now has opened a branch of CCDH in Washington, D.C. Current and past board members of this group have multiple connections to the British government. Their work includes urging Google to demonetize sites like Zero Hedge and The Federalist. The group came to our attention earlier this year when it accused me of climate change denial in one of its reports. I don't deny climate change. What I do deny is that we should spend $50 trillion or more on ideas that I don't think work. The CCDH kind of sounds like a British version of Media Matters. Well, during its investigation of the Biden administration's censorship efforts, American First Legal uncovered documents which they released last week verifying that the Center for Digital Hate met directly with officials from the White House and the State Department's Bureau of Counterterrorism. In 2022, the CCDH submitted its research and policy recommendations to the White House task force to address online harassment and abuse. In their submission, CCDH said it had, quote, studied the way anti-vaccine extremists, hate actors, climate change deniers, that would include me now, I guess, and misogynists weaponize platforms to spread lies and attack marginalized groups. Through our work, we have seen the depth and breadth of harm that each tech company profits from on a daily basis. 6 months later, the White House task force issued a sweeping blueprint for action, including digital equity grants, whatever the heck those are, and Department of Education guidance to be issued to colleges, among other things. So why is the Biden White House taking policy advice from a foreign-based NGO that is dedicated to censoring its ideological opponents? If America knew about this, I'm sure most of them would not be okay with left-wing activists from Britain giving their definition of terrorism to our State Department's Bureau of Terrorism. Let me flip that around. Let's say the president is a Republican. Would you be okay with that if you're a liberal? I wouldn't be okay with it if it was a Republican president. You shouldn't be okay with it if it's a liberal president. That government net that I talked about earlier just keeps getting stretched wider and wider and wider. And it's not like the American left needs any help redefining terms like terrorist or extremist and hate. They're rushing off the deep end just fine on their own. USAID's disinformation primer endorses targeting advertisers as a means of shutting down the online speech that they don't like. This is something that was really perfected by Media Matters. And it is really unconstitutional if the government is involved at all. And it's all done in the name of stopping disinformation, to keep you safe. That's all they're doing. Financial blacklisting is a growing trend in the global censorship effort. It happened in the 1950s with the communists, and it was wrong then. It is wrong now. In the U.S. Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, they sent an email to the heads of major U.S. banks. In it, they showcased a report titled Bankrolling Bigotry, an overview of the online funding strategy of American hate groups. This report includes mainstream conservative Christian organizations like the Alliance Defending Freedom, the Family Research Council, and many others. The report urges online platforms to cut off the ability of these so-called hate groups to raise money. Let that sink in for a second. A division of the U.S. Treasury Department that helps prosecute financial crimes endorsed a hate group list to major U.S. banks, including Wells Fargo, Citibank, J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and others. You can see where this is trending. It is only a matter of time until allowing conservative organizations to use banking services gets labeled as a financial crime. This has been done to groups before, and it never ends well. I beg Democrats who have not lost their mind to this leftist insanity to please heed the warning of history. One of the groups that created the Bankrolling Bigotry report is a UK-based think tank called the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. In 2021, it received a grant from the U.S. State Department to this foreign actor to, quote, advance the development of promising and innovative technologies against disinformation and propaganda. And big surprise, ISD frequently labels basic conservative viewpoints as hateful and or disinformation. Just as an example, it labeled the Libs of TikTok Twitter account as a prolific spreader of hate. How? It is only reposting things that were posted on TikTok. Man, it must be nice to make sweeping pronouncements like that and be considered an expert and watch the government grants roll in. Another author of Bankrolling Bigotry, the Global Disinformation Index, is also based in the UK, and it is also known for its efforts to demonetize conservative news sites. In 2022, it ranked U.S. news sites with the lowest and highest levels of disinformation risk. And brace yourself for this. Somehow, all of the highest disinformation risks were sites that were conservative. We are up against a sprawling network of government agencies, think tanks, the largest companies in the world, all collaborating in multiple ways with your tax dollars for the same end goal, to censor unapproved speech.